All right. So welcome to the second installment of 8 installments. We did 3 of these over the last 3 months, but I had 8 of them that I really wanted to present, and I felt like 8 months would be too long, so we set them up to run weekly. And the first thing I want to do in my housekeeping right now is just call out the IIBA, the International Institute of Business Analysis, for those of you that may or not be familiar with them, in Tampa Bay, for hosting or sponsoring, I should say, these events. And I've reached out to lots of different people to see if they would be interested in participating. So let me just very quickly, couple of things that, just so you know, from a homekeeping standpoint, there's going to be a PDF that I'll send out to everybody that attends. If you send me an email at the end, I'll send you a message back with the PDF. I will turn this video into something that you can watch later on if you decide you want to come back to it. In case you can't sleep tonight, you can watch the video and it'll knock you right out. And then just want to touch on the next meeting, which will be next week, and it'll be, again, a repeat of the requirements and testing. And then after that, it'll be all new topics. So in case you're not familiar with what I'm doing, well, here, let me give you a little bit of background about me. My name is Richard Frederick, and I owned a software company back in the 1990s. This screenshot is from the 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s. And my partners and I, we built this company where we integrated software on the Macintosh to do workflow automation many years ago. I started teaching project managers and business analysts back in 2005. And I honestly thought that within the next 3 or 4 years, everybody would be automated. But I quickly realized that we were quite a ways away. So I realized I kind of reset my thought to probably around 2020. And here it is, 2020, 15 years after I started teaching. And I think now we're just now really starting to see, let's call it the digital assistant. We have them in our homes, but we're trying to show them, getting them into work. And the buzzword today that I hear a lot about is the digital transformation, which is just a fancy way of saying that we're going to make everything that's analog data driven, or as many things that are analog data driven as possible. So really it's about data. And the robots that we talk about really are data. That's really what they are. We just call them robots because it's a front end that we can interface with. That's called cognitive services. Okay, long story short, I've been teaching business analysts and project managers for 15 years. And while the curriculum is great, there's great curriculum out there, there's a piece of it that's not really directly associated with data. Meaning we talk about data in let's say an introduction to business analysis course, but only for a brief moment describing an ERD, an entity relationship diagram. We don't really spend a lot of time teaching business analysts and project managers who have to act as business analysts, meaning anybody who has to go out and elicit requirements, how to do it specifically for data. And so what I did was I put together a course, just kind of quickly. It's called Requirements Development and Management for Business Data Analytics, the Language of Data. I have a requirements class and a project management class that work together. You'll notice that there's all these logos. So the joke about the logos is that if you're struggling with requirements, you're not alone, because nobody has really figured it all out. There's no right way to do it. And it's funny that that statement comes up because a lot of people in my classes will ask me, well, what's the right way to write a requirement? And that's really not the best way to look at it. I mean, what I'm about to tell you is there's not really a wrong way to write a requirement. There's different ways and different companies. And really the way you have to look at it is, does it work or does it not work? And who's going to determine that is your stakeholder at user acceptance testing. So people come in and they'll go, well, the requirements were wrong. No, the requirements weren't wrong. They just didn't work as tested. So I went back and I looked through the material and I said, well, where is the material that tells you actually how to write a requirement? And interestingly enough, there really isn't any specifically. Hey, this is how you would write a requirement. Exactly. What's the parts of it? How do you really know? So that's where I started working on this idea that not only would I teach people about how to write a requirement, but I'd also bring in the data side of it as well, because really ultimately data is where it's all going. The digital transformation is here, and we will all have to know data in addition to product and process requirements, which is really traditionally what we've been training on. So if you go take a project management course, or you take a requirements class or business analysis class, what you're probably going to get is a class that teaches you, at least in the use case or the case study of the class, an example of a product development cycle or a process cycle. And nothing wrong with that. You're going to always need to know that. But what you're probably not going to get is something that's specific to the digital transformation, which is really data oriented. So that would be something along the lines of data mining and machine learning. So that's kind of the hole or the gap that I'm trying to fill in. And I mentioned to people that if you like this little piece of the foundation, then hopefully you'll love the class. So with that, let me just kind of show you, this is a traditional requirements agenda for a class. It just covers your basic information that you would want to know for requirements. There's foundational topics, which is what this series of webinars is about, just the foundational topics. But it covers the traditional, what I call the four fingers: elicit, analyze, document, and validate, the four fingers of requirements engineering. And that's a really important component, whether you're a project manager, a business analyst, a product owner, a scrum master. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at all the studies, the reason people say that projects fail is because of requirements. And the irony is nobody really spends a lot of time talking about those. So I'm hoping in this next 30 minutes to give you a really strong takeaway about how to think about requirements when you're out there communicating with your stakeholders. All right, so let's just kind of touch on this. So the thing about requirements, and what I'm going to try to get across to you, is this. There's really just three takeaways that I want you to take from this webinar. The first is the structure of a testable statement. At the end of the day, every requirement that you gather, elicit, abstract, whatever it is, decompose, whatever it is that you guys call it at your shop, ultimately has to go through a testing process. And the final test is user acceptance testing. What most of us don't realize is that whatever we elicit from our stakeholder has to eventually be written or rewritten in a format that it can be tested. So in the philosophy of do more with less, trying to get everything done as efficiently as possible, I found that it would really benefit anybody whose job it is to go elicit requirements to understand how the requirement is rewritten in a testable statement. Once you recognize that, then you're going to be able to come back and write better requirements, or better yet, elicit better requirements from your stakeholders. Okay, so we're going to cover, the main clause, the subordinate clause. We're going to talk about structured English, where there is no standard that exists. And then we're going to talk about structured query language, which is an ISO ANSI standard. And then someone once brought up to me, or previously brought up to me, about NoSQL. And I'll touch on any questions you guys might have about NoSQL. They thought I was trying to not pay attention to the fact that there's NoSQL, but that really wasn't the case. My goal here is to take a person who's not an expert. So if you're a subject matter expert in data science, this really isn't targeted towards you. Or if you're a subject matter expert in software testing, this really isn't targeted towards you. It's targeted towards those of us who have to go communicate with business stakeholders and then kind of carry them all the way through the process and then back with user acceptance testing. So that's really who I'm after. So the people who have to act as like the liaison between the business side and the technical side, regardless of what your job title is, regardless of what your role is. Okay. So what exactly is a requirement? Well, there's no wrong answer. I tell people in my classes all the time, there's no wrong way to do things. There really just boils down to, does it work or does it not work? And one of the things that I found as I started talking to people was that a lot of people didn't really understand the concept of a testable statement, otherwise known as a test case. So really a test case is just two things. That's what's cool about it. It's really, really simple. It's a main clause, which is the front end, and it's a subordinate clause, which is the back end. Now, what most of us weren't told is that the vast majority, probably 99% of the statements that we get from our stakeholders, the requirements that we get from our stakeholders, those are subordinate clauses. So the things that we were trained on and the things that I trained people on, the classic, the system shall statements, or the system shall allow the user to statements, or the more current version of as a, I need, so that user stories, those statements are actually the subordinate clause of the testable statement or test case. That's the piece that you're trying to say, hey, yes, this works, or no, this doesn't work. What they don't tell you, i.e. the stakeholders or anybody that kind of teaches the material, is that what you're not getting is the main clause, what's driving the subordinate clause. So that is what I call the given, precondition, and the when input if it's, you know, a product or process. And I'm going to show you that there's a subtle difference between structured English and structured query language in how you think about the statement. And that's really all I'm trying to do, is get you to think about, hey, when a stakeholder says, I need something, what are they really talking to me about? Okay, so that's the key that I'm trying to get you to take away. Now, the funniest thing about humans, and we're going to address this more next week when we talk about requirements and testing, is that the way we speak to each other is something, well, first of all, it's called natural language, but what I like to call it is nuanced ambiguity. So if you've ever been in a meeting and you were with someone else and you were listening to the meeting and you left the meeting with that person and you started talking to each other, and what they were telling you was what they heard and what you heard was something completely different, that's the challenge of natural language, is that it's a very subtle language and it's very ambiguous. So there's a lot of nuance in it and there's a lot of ambiguity in it. And the problem is that our job as this middle person between the business side and the technical side is to convert that language, that natural language, that nuanced ambiguity into something that can be built and ultimately tested. So if you're struggling, you're not alone. This is why requirements are hard. I tell people all the time, requirements is the hardest thing, especially eliciting requirements, hardest thing you can do. Why? Because of this concept of nuanced ambiguity. Now, really what happens is that we get this information, people say, hey, I need this, or we need this, that need statement, which again is the subordinate clause. Then we take that and we start to kind of break things down. And traditionally, it's pretty much a process flow. So you'll notice that in the vast majority of the courses that we've gone through, that we teach, we tend to focus on process flow, and then we break that down into kind of a structured English. And then that we sort of hand that over to another group, a technical group, who might then take that and break it down into some pseudocode or some application prototypes. And then we go back through a testing process to validate it. So that's the structured English approach. On the data side, which is really where things are going, and that's the reason why I'm doing these classes, is because I'm trying to get people prepared for what's here now, this whole digital transformation. The process goes through a data flow diagram, and then from that, we have our structured query language, which helps us develop our entity relationship diagrams and our physical models and our IO data structures and things that we need to generate dashboards, all that kind of information. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is talk about structured English and structured query language with this statement. I want you to think of these as literally just one level below natural language. So instead of this complex thinking and, oh my gosh, I got to know all this complexity, the idea is that just keep it simple. You got plain language that you're using to converse. Structured language is just one level below. You're just going down one level, and you're trying to get rid of all of the, what I call the fluff, the stuff that makes language flow. You're just trying to get to really boil it down to really three things: operation statements, which are written as English phrases executed from the top down; conditional blocks, which many of us are familiar with, indicated by keywords such as if, then, and else; and repetition blocks, which are indicated by keywords such as do, while, and until. Okay, great. But the thing that I want you to see is the red where it says no specific standards exist. This is great. So I've been looking for the standards for years and years and years, only to find out that there really aren't any standards. And again, it goes back to, well, people always say, what's the right way to write a requirement? And I'm like, if there isn't a right or wrong, it's does it work or does it not work within your organization? And I stress that because what works in one organization is not guaranteed to work in another organization. So again, don't beat yourself up. If things aren't working, recognize that you have to make a modification, but that it may not be you. So again, I'm always trying to let people know, hey, it's not always about you. But let me give you some examples of structured English. And some of these are probably familiar with you. You've probably seen examples of these. So here's an example for each customer number in the data store customers. And then it's got A for each loan in the data store loans that matches the above customer number. And then you've got these keep a running total, keep a running total, keep a running total. Now, what I'm always trying to get people to do is add the given, the when, and the then. So I'll set it up like this. Given, which in this case would be a precondition for each customer number in the data store customers. When each loan in the data store loans that matches the above customer number, then keep a running total and keep a running total and keep a running total. The idea is that there is a structure, a given precondition statement, a when statement, which is kind of your input, and then a then, which is the output. So all of those output statements keep a running total. That's what we're testing. We're testing all of those output statements. Do they work as they were specified? Okay. Other examples, and I won't go through them all, but just to give you an idea, because I only got a few more minutes here. A sequence of steps. I mean, these are examples of structured language, step 1, step 2, step 3. Simple conditions. The if statement is the main clause. The then statement is the subordinate clause. So again, as you're looking at statements, I want you to think in terms of, hey, is this the subordinate clause? Because 9 times out of 10, when they ask you, we need this, that's a subordinate clause. So your job as the analyst is to go figure out the main clause, what's driving the subordinate clause. And of course, that's the process. If that was easy, they wouldn't need you to do the job. I always tell people all the time, requirements are hard. And if they were easy, business analysts wouldn't even exist. It's such an important concept that, it has a whole job, a whole industry, a whole user group dedicated to it because it's really complex and hard to do. You got complex condition statements. Again, if then, the ifs are the main clauses, the thens are the subordinate clause. You're always testing the then statements. All right. Here's a multiple condition, which is a decision table that you'll see with many conditions. Each of it has different variables. There's a formula, we'll talk about it next week, which is variable to the power of condition to help you identify the number of tests that you would have to run to validate all of the different rules. We're not going to get into that here, but just understand similar concept. The then statement are the different results that you're going to get from all the different rules that you're going to run. So those are your subordinate clauses. You got one-to-many iterations. You've got, zero-to-many iterations where you're doing a bunch of steps until the condition is false. One-to-many, you repeat the steps until the condition is false. Again, what you're looking for is just trying to figure out in your head, what's the subordinate clause, what's the main clause, and just knowing the differences between those two. All right. Now we'll talk about SQL. And again, I tell people all the time, I'm not an expert on SQL, don't claim to be. My job that I see as an analyst, my job is to be an expert on knowing who to go talk to. I'm a subject matter expert on going to seek out other subject matter experts. So, but with that, I think it's important for analysts today to at least have some familiarity with SQL. And the more familiarity you have with it, the better it's going to serve you. Now, SQL is really old. It was called Dr. Codd's Relational Algebra, which I always thought was a great name for a stout beer. But it was really about comparative analysis between data tables. And it's been around for a long time. Right now, it kind of falls under the ISO and ANSI, American National Standards Institute. It's a basic command set, has a pretty standard vocabulary, about 100 keyword clauses. So there's that word clause. It's pretty easy to learn, and there's a lot of dialects. The question was brought to me previously about NoSQL, not only SQL. And I don't really get into it here. It's not as common of a command language used on the business side yet. Not to say that it's not important. As a matter of fact, SQL is becoming, if it's not already, a subset of NoSQL. So NoSQL is like the big data lake, and SQL is like the structured data kind of inside of it. Again, I'm not a technical expert on that, so I don't pretend to be the expert on that thing. But I want you to understand that my research has been that a lot of the NoSQL languages are including now SQL because people keep asking for it. So SQL isn't going away, even though there is no SQL today. Okay. But what is SQL? So SQL falls in a couple different categories. And there's just two that, for the most part, we need to know about as analysts. Not that there's not more that you could learn, but mainly there's a definition language, which is where you're creating your database objects, your tables, your indices, your views, and you're defining access rights to those database objects. But once those data tables are set up, those instances are set up, then really the bulk of SQL is really manipulation, where you're trying to work with the data. And this is where, as an analyst, you're going to get a lot of information about all this. And that includes, clauses to insert, update, delete, and select. Select is probably the most common thing that is asked of the system, because we select data from different tables to then have a result that can give us some kind of answer to the question that we're seeking. Last week, we talked about the 6 steps of the cross-industry standard for data mining and machine learning. And let me just run those through really quickly. There's understand the business, which is the BA's role. There's understand the data, which I now say is kind of the Scrum Master DBA of the future. There's prep the data, which is your system architect. There is model the data, your data scientist. There's validate the data, which is your QA test. And there's deploy your solution. The BA of the future, and it's happening pretty quickly, is going to be involved a lot with business intelligence. So you may already be working on a lot of business intelligence projects right now. And those business intelligence requirements will probably involve some level of basic knowledge of SQL. So that's why I bring this up. Anyway, so with SQL, you have these statements that control transactions, program flow, connection, sessions, and diagnostics. You have these clauses and identifiers. You have expressions. You have predicate filters, and you have queries. The statements themselves usually have some kind of a semicolon as a statement terminator, but here's just a real quick set of keyword clauses. Select from where is really probably one of the most common clauses that you're going to get. Now, the question is that, where is that? Is that the given input when, or is that the then statement? Let's take a look. So what you're going to find out, and this is kind of cool, is that given is your input. So you have your instance or your table of information, also known as a dimension table. And your select from where is a when process. So what a lot of times they'll do is they'll say select from where, and that's the only statement. So they don't really give you the given. You have to sort of find out what that is. And then you're usually given the select from where statement, which is, again, part of your statement, your test statement, but it's in the main clause. Your subordinate clause is the result that you're looking for, which is the output of the select statement. So in this case, it says, just really quickly, given an instance of product, so I got some product fields or categories, whatever you want to call them, in a dimension table, says select all products where category is gadgets. Great. So given and when, I have those as my main clause, and my subordinate clause is the then result, which is the resulting two records that pop out. Gizmo and Power Gizmo are both category of gadgets. All right. Here's an example with what's called a join, a real simple join, where you're taking two tables and you're putting them together. And again, I sort of give you the statement of given an instance of product and company. So you could write this out as an actual written example, given an instance of product, P name, price, category, manufacturer, and company, company name, stock price, country, dimension tables. Then have a written statement that says find all products under $200 and manufactured in Japan. Then return their product names, P name, and prices. Okay, so what this is doing is it's showing how it's taking data from two different data tables. It's running what's called a join statement, and it's giving you a result. In this case, it's the single touch for $149.99. All right, and that ultimately, that then result, that's what you're testing. We need to find the, the product that's under $200 and manufactured in Japan. Okay, that's the requirement would be come across something like that. Here's another example. This is an aggregation using a count function. You're going to find that joins and aggregations are probably one of the most common things that you're going to get in a business intelligence set of requirements, because they're always trying to figure out some sort of results that then ends up on a dashboard. So this is the kind of data that would find its way to a dashboard. So given an instance of product, count, which is your win process, the number of products within the category, and then give us a result. Now, in structured English, usually it's a precondition. In SQL, your given statement, meaning in structured English, your given statement's a precondition. In SQL, your given statement is usually an input. And that's where the subtle difference is. In structured English, your when statement is usually your input. And in SQL, your when statement is a process, the process that the data goes through to then become some sort of, or transform into some type of a result. All right. So that's it. I just knocked out 30 minutes. But let me go ahead and cover what I just went through. Okay, so go back to the goal. The goal here is I want you to start thinking like a tester. And if you stay with me through all of these foundation series presentations, I'm going to repeat that over and over and over again, that probably one of the best things that you can do as an analyst, whether you're acting in the role of a scrum master, product owner, project manager, business analyst, or any other title or role, if you're dealing with requirements, it will help you dramatically to think like a tester. Now, what does that mean? That means that when someone says, we need this, what they're really giving you is a subordinate clause. That's what they're giving you. What your job is then to document that and then go back and figure out what the main clause is. That's what your job is, so that you have a fully complete testable statement. Why? because that's going to save you an enormous amount of time in your process with all of your technical professionals. What happens is, a lot of times as an analyst, we'll take the statement verbatim from the stakeholder, document it, and hand it over to the technology group, who's then trying to figure out what the clauses need to be. Then it goes through a whole QA gets built, goes through a QA process, comes all the way back to UAT, user acceptance testing. Stakeholder says, that's not what I asked for. Had the analyst just taken another step and fleshed out the clauses, a lot of this work could have been eliminated, the rework that came from the fact that the UAT did not work could have been eliminated. All of that saves a lot of time, allows you to get more work done, improves your throughput of your process. Just remember the subtle difference. Both structured English and structured query language are still going to use the main clause of given and when, and the subordinate clause of then. You don't have to write those, but I do. If someone says, hey, should I write those down? I'm like, why not? If you can train people to think in this format and communicate in this format, you will save yourself a lot of rework. But only if it fits. I mean, don't try to force something that doesn't fit. If it doesn't come across naturally, some of the examples, they didn't always use when as either the input or the process. So it has to kind of fit when you're communicating, but be aware of the givens, the whens, and the thens. And then notice that the subtle difference between structured English is given precondition when input, and structured query language is given input and then when process. Okay, so that's my 30 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and open up the floor to anybody that's got any kind of questions. So any questions?
Yeah, this is Mike here. Are you gonna, send us these slides? Can we have these?
Absolutely.
Okay, just to go over it. It's gonna take a couple of times to, for me to actually grasp this.
It's all right. It's all right. This is gonna be in everything that's going out. But do me a favor. I'm gonna type in my email real fast and send me an email. Just say, webinar slides or whatever, so that because I don't get the list I don't have like a list of attendees that shows up on my screen. So just send me an email, rfrederick.pmp@gmail.com, and just say, slides, and I'll send you back the slides. So
okay.
Yeah. And then, like I said, I've got this, I'm going to keep repeating this structure as we move forward into the next session. So I got another session next week on requirements and testing. And then after that, I got another session and another session. So I got 8 of them in a row, eight Fridays in a row. So, and if you think this is good information and you think this would be great to bring out to your company, I would love to talk to you about that. So if this is something that you think your company could use or your organization could use, please, reach out to me.
So I've got a question, please.
Yes.
When you're trying to flesh out the main clause,
yes,
it's best to do that with the same stakeholders, right?
I'm sorry, say it again.
So you've got the, when you're trying to flesh out the main clause, so you've got the subordinate clause from the stakeholders, and you want to try to start to break down that subordinate clause, try and understand what the main clause is. It's best to go back to your stakeholders for you to understand.
Oh, it depends. Sometimes your stakeholders know, and a lot of times they don't know. So you have to circle around your stakeholders many times. I'm sure you've experienced that, where you go to your stakeholder for clarity and they just say, well, I need this, and they can't explain any more than that. So sometimes they can give you the information, and sometimes you have to circle around them to figure out what the main clause is. That's a great question.
Thanks.
Cool. Anybody else? Any other questions? So let me just touch on really quickly before I let you guys all out of here. The biggest focus that I'm really trying to get across was really 2 things. One was I'm trying to fill in gaps in the traditional curriculum. There's nothing wrong with the traditional curriculum. So don't want to make it sound like there's a problem with it. It's just that there's only so many things they can teach you in a class in a given amount of time. And I've trained thousands of business analysts and project managers over the last 15 years with traditional curriculum. And I found that, again, the focus is predominantly on product and process. Nothing wrong with that. We're going to always do product and process. But with the advent of digital assistants, eventually morphing into intelligent assistants, I felt like it was really critical that people be aware of, people in our business, be aware of business data analytics, or just a fancy way of saying data mining and machine learning, just the language of data, because of this whole concept of the digital transformation and the reality that intelligence is going to be a part of our work world. And I think that's something that hasn't really hit a lot of people yet. I mean, many people have an Alexa or Google Now or Siri or Cortana or some kind of assistant that they use in their personal life, but that assistant hasn't maybe shown up yet in their business life. Although I have talked to a few people that are like, yes, we have Alexa for business now, and we use it to schedule rooms and to monitor lights and things of that nature. So this idea of understanding the language of data is really how we're going to be communicating effectively with our digital assistants. Requirements, the language of data, they're the same thing. When you write a testable requirement, that is the language of data. That's how you're going to be communicating effectively with your assistant. So the idea is that if I can teach people to write a requirement effectively at the beginning, then it'll move all the way through the process effectively, hopefully working. A working requirement will make it all the way through. Then ultimately the assistant will operate effectively. And that's really kind of where we're going. In the class that I teach, I use an example of a portfolio management tool with demand management, which is the idea that there's more projects than there are people. Anybody struggling with that? You have way more projects than you have actual resources to do the work. Put a yes if you're running into that. Anybody having that issue? More projects than people? Yeah, that's the whole do more with less concept, right? So in theory, that's supposed to be handled at your portfolio level through a concept known as the efficient frontier, which is a risk return scenario for every project that's documented in the portfolio. There's a couple problems with that. One is that not every project is in the portfolio. A lot of projects aren't even seen as projects yet. They're just issues, and they don't rise to the level of being put in the portfolio. That's one problem. The other problem is that it takes a lot of work to figure out where to invest those resources. So the idea is that eventually you'll have an intelligent assistant who, when an analyst fleshes out the original business case, and that business case is then used to start the project into the portfolio, to what we call it staging, stage the project into the portfolio, then that intelligent assistant will automatically do comparative analysis and decide where that project fits in the order, the prioritization order of the work that needs to get done. So it's like having your intelligent assistant automatically work on your backlog. You know, just while you're entering stuff in the backlog, the assistant is going to be working on the backlog, making sure that everything's fitting to how the corporate structure is set up, meaning the strategic key performance indicators, the weighted scoring of all that's done. That's the case that I use in the requirements side of it, and from an explanation standpoint. And in the project management side, I use the example of how to actually walk all the way through the 6 steps of the CRISP DMML. So I'm just on LinkedIn. That's my main presence. But yeah, I do have a website, but it's just a reference site. Yeah. So any other questions or thoughts or concerns or issues or?
Is this your personal site? PM Essentials?
No, it's my company. Yeah, it's our
Okay.
company. Well, the company's called Assured Solutions, but our website's called PM-Essentials.
Okay.
You got a time frame, you got a place that you're going to.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. Well, I hope to see everybody back here again next week for the requirements and testing section. And then good. I hope this was a good use of time for everybody. So let me know, put a yes if you thought this was a good use of time. Hopefully you got a chance to bring your lunch. Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and pause the recording here.